Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to Interchange, and thank you so very much for joining us. Lots to talk about today. We're going to talk about this Occupy Wall Street demonstration. It is spreading from Wall Street to Wisconsin. We'll talk about the never-ending fight over whether or not to build a trolley line in downtown Milwaukee, and we will also talk about the incredible effect that Steve Jobs had on not only all of our lives, but all of society. Okay, let's introduce everyone. We have newspaper columnist Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, longtime broadcaster, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. Denise Callaway is the coordinator of business and community partnerships for the Milwaukee Public School System. And Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, the first thing we'll talk about is the Occupy Wall Street demonstration out in New York City. Started with a handful of people apparently unhappy with the impact the financial industry has had on our society. Now it's grown to some days thousands of people demonstrating, some days a giant crowd, and the big unions are getting involved now. This weekend there's supposed to be a related demonstration scheduled for Madison. Next weekend there's one scheduled for here in Milwaukee. How do you explain this thing appearing to take on a life of its own, Gerard?
I think it's a general frustration that people have with how the banking industry in particular has priced its product. It's just out of control. The fees that they're charging make no sense to me. And I have no problem with the industry wanting to make a profit. They should make a profit. That's what they're in business to do. But the way that consumers can respond is by protesting, by pulling their money out of the bank and putting it in banks that where they feel that they as consumers are getting a better deal.
They're starting to do that. The smaller banks are starting to do that.
And that's where the unions come in into this, because they've got some muscle given the size of their investments in these banks and the size of their deposits in these banks. So they might be able to create some energy around pulling some of those prices back or having some fair pricing. My frustration with the protesters is that I don't know that many of them even know why they're protesting. It seems that a lot of them are just there because they're fed up. And they're fed up with a whole lot of things that may be unrelated to what generally has now come to be a better focus for this protest, and that's disparity in incomes and the cost of products in the financial services industry.
Denise, so I'm a millionaire working on Wall Street. I'm the president of a bank or a big stock brokerage firm. What effect do these kids sleeping in tents on Wall Street have on me at all?
Well, I think it's not just the kids, excuse me, who may be sleeping in tents on Wall Street. It's, as you said earlier, the thousands of people that are showing up for these demonstrations during the day, the way that it's caught on, not only here in Wisconsin, but on the West Coast as well. The fact that we're talking about this and why people are there has an impact on bankers and these large financial institutions that people are concerned about. It is, I think, the fees, particularly Bank of America saying, I'm going to charge you $5 to use your debit card. I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. But it's been building over a period of time. We may tend to forget it's not that long ago that the federal government had to impose pretty tough restrictions on financial institutions because of the fees that they were charging and some of the other things that were being done. People are looking at the tremendous money that Wall Street financial institutions are making, and you combine that with the fact that many people find it very difficult to get a loan for a house or for a car. And I think people find this disparity between seeing what's happening in terms of the financial institutions, the money they're making, how people feel they're being socked and nickel and dime right and left on fees, and that people can't access money that they know is there, where people are just fed up.
Kevin, I've read speculation both locally and in the national media that maybe the movement in Wisconsin, the demonstrations at the Capitol last year in Wisconsin, gave birth to this.
Possibly. This could be the new normal. You don't engage in civil debate, you engage in civil discourse. I'm not so sure I buy into that, that there's thousands and thousands of people at these rallies. I'm skeptical of the mainstream media and their penchant for inflating the numbers. I also don't buy into the assertion that, well, they're out there because Bank of America has imposed this $5 fee. I think it's larger than that. That's part of it. But
I think that's the straw that broke the camel's back.
I think this is a partisan movement. Normally, these folks would be protesting a Republican administration. We don't have a Republican administration. So they are using Wall Street as the target, but it's a smokescreen. This is in effect a re-elect Barack Obama movement.
I don't think you can say that, Kevin, because one of the things that's happening is when people have tried to say, and not unlike what we saw with the Arab Spring, who's in charge of this? When reporters are saying, who do I talk to? Who's organizing this? There really were not a lot of organizers. You couldn't until only recently, like within the past day or two, that big labor unions have become involved. This early work that was being done really was grassroots, groundswell work, spread much the same way the Arab Spring information was spread via social media. It's people who I think really were just tired of feeling like we can do better. Well,
they're out there with their union signs, but
now they are, but not initially.
You said you don't know why they're out there. I've seen 3 different answers when they're interviewed.
Right.
And I'll be quick. The number one.
No, I'm sorry, you're dominating.
We don't know. I was interrupted during my response from Denise, and I want to finish. There's 3 answers. 1, we don't know why we're out here. 2, well, we really want the evil corporations to be destroyed along with capitalism. And 3, we don't like Barack Obama. So, but Barack Obama, when the Tea Party organized against Barack Obama, they were racist. That same charge is not being issued against these folks.
Do you really see big banks and big financial institutions caving to public pressure at all? Have you ever seen it in your life?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What's happening now is important. And actually, I'm closer to what Kevin said than he might believe. It is a political movement. It is a social movement. And it has nothing to do with fees that banks are charging. It has to do with who created the economic disaster that we are all living through. And we know who did it. It was banks. It was, all kinds of phony financial instruments that collapsed because they were fraudulent to start with. There was all the foreclosures that have destroyed the homes of the people in America. And during the people who created the financial disaster that we're still suffering from,
Republicans and Democrats,
got rich.
Both parties.
Be quiet a minute. You've talked enough, Kevin, really. The people who created it got rich, and everybody else is poor. And guess what now? We put a few regulations on the banks after they created the worst financial disaster since the Great Depression. And guess what? The Republican Party wants to roll back those regulations, wants to say, we don't want to put any regulations on the banks. And besides that, we don't even want to raise taxes on the richest people in America who got rich off of this financial disaster that they created. And that's what this movement really is. And I think it's a great movement because it, as Denise says, is grassroots. It started grassroots. And it is the Tea Party of the left. It is pulling the Democratic Party. You got some Democratic leaders, including the president now, saying they have to respect this movement the same way the Republican Party is respecting the right-wing creeps who don't want to tax anyone wealthy and don't want any regulations on the people who created this problem.
The Tea Party never wore ski masks or urinated in public or disrupted traffic.
They did all of that, and they waved racist signs around.
I'll be quiet now. I've talked enough.
They just often carry guns to presidential rallies.
The next thing we'll talk about are the politicians still arguing about the city of Milwaukee's plan to spend tens of millions of dollars building a train trolley line in downtown Milwaukee. Some aldermen, some county supervisors are now urging Mayor Barrett and Congressman Gwen Moore to push the feds a little bit to let them spend the money on the Milwaukee bus system instead. They argue there's no point in building a trolley system when the regular old bus system, in their words, is on life support.
They are right. The money never should have been designated for this trolley to begin with. I think in times of plenty, you can afford to be somewhat frivolous and or go down the list of needs, if you will, for those who think it's an important priority with spending. But in this case, you've got X amount of money, and it's got to be matched with almost twice that amount of money if you're going to be realistic about the infrastructure and operating needs of this trolley system. And that piece is not there. Of a three-legged stool, the operating cost, the building cost, and the infrastructure cost that have to be borne by a third party, two of those legs just don't exist. And there's certainly not a willingness to find the money to put into the ongoing operation of this when, at the same time, there's a need that everyone acknowledges to support public bus transportation, especially extending those lines out to where the jobs are. There was a recent job study that just came out that showed a growth of jobs in the Milwaukee region. What they failed to point out is that of the 4 counties in the region where the job growth is occurring is not so much in Milwaukee County, but Waukesha, Zaki, and Washington counties.
Now, Tom Barrett says the people who don't like this trolley system, and this is his word, hate the city.
Well, the people who don't like any mass transportation hate the city, and they hate the poor people who live in the city. I happen to agree with Gerard that this money is better spent on the bus system right now than this trolley, just on the basis of the people served. The trolley system is not to serve the people who are most desperately in need of transportation right now, and the ones that are suffering as a result of their former county executive, now governor, slashing transit funds for the city of Milwaukee and for the county of Milwaukee. This money is much better spent on that bus system that Scott Walker claimed that he wanted to support when he was county executive, but now he is torpedoing as governor. Just on the, I don't even want to argue anymore about whether the trolley is worthwhile or whether mass transit in general is worthwhile. Obviously, the best use of these federal funds a long time ago was some kind of transit that would connect Waukesha and Milwaukee, and Waukesha didn't want it because they didn't want to be connected to Milwaukee, and that killed that. The second best use of that is to save this bus system that is now under attack from the governor and from people who just don't like mass transit in general.
But people have said for years, this money is not going. You can argue all you want. The money's not going to the buses.
Federal policy is supposed to go to something new, not
exactly.
existing.
So I mean, I think the chances of this money, even though it could be better spent on the county transit system, the chances of it going to support the county transit system instead of the trolley are about as great as the governor's chances were of having that high-speed rail money go into roads. It's not going to happen. But I think what this does is bring up the bigger question that we have about the financial solvency of the county transit system. To say it's on life support is in some ways an understatement. It is hanging on by the skin of its teeth, and so many people.
Treads.
Yes, it's treads. Thank you, Gerard. I like that. But so many people depend on that bus system that I think it brings up a bigger question for us, and that is, rather than waiting for some money to come from the federal government that maybe we can shift around some way to put a Band-Aid on this, we have to have a serious discussion about how we're going to fund this transit system. If we're serious about it, we need to figure out a way to fund it, and sometimes that may be doing something that's unpopular, figuring out a way to have some kind of revenue coming into that system through some kind of perhaps tax, because if we do not do this, what we're going to see is this system is going to continue to shrink and shrink and shrink. And with that, as the economy begins to recover at some point in time, the opportunities that people have to take advantage of that are also going to be lessened greatly because they're not going to be able to get to jobs.
Do you save a system that people obviously don't want to ride?
Well, you have to have buses.
Lots of people want to ride.
You have to have a bus system.
They're desperate for those.
But I mean, the numbers keep shrinking and shrinking and shrinking.
They do, and I've heard that it's
keep raising the fares.
It's on the verge of collapse, and somehow we always find a way to save it or keep it going. Maybe the answer isn't a tax, but maybe just like people who use cars have to pay for the use of driving.
No, they don't.
They do. I mean, they absolutely do. They maintain it. Their license.
The highways far more than mass transit.
Now, am I allowed to say be quiet? No, I would never say that to my friend and colleague. Instead of a tax, maybe you do increase the user fee and make it and increase the price on bus tickets, bus passes, etc. If it's that important, and I agree, and I said it weeks ago, that the bus system should have been subsidized as opposed to this trolley that it would only be used by a very, very small fraction of the downtown businesses and tourists and so forth, and it's only a 2-mile track. Obviously, it makes more sense. And yes, policy says, well, it can't be done. It can't be done. That's why you lobby your people who can make the difference in Washington and see if you can't use some of this funding for this much-needed bus system.
You can't keep the cost on the poorest people in our community.
I didn't say jack it up.
That's exactly what you said.
I said increase. I did not say jack up.
What's the difference between increase and jack up?
The funding flaw with Milwaukee's transit system is that it's primarily on the property tax. The plan to have at least shifted some of that cost onto a broad sales tax, 1/4 cent, to subsidize the transit system makes a lot of sense, but that is dead in the water as long as there's no stomach for wanting to increase taxes.
Who is it that doesn't have this stomach? Believe me, the poor people who need to ride those buses and desperately need to get to their jobs, there are going to be thousands of people who can't even get to their work if these routes disappear. You know, when you say no stomach, you're talking about people who don't want to pay taxes to help the most desperately poor people among us.
Well, I don't know if it's people who don't want to pay taxes to help poor people. I think it's people who want better management of their taxes, a prioritization.
That's a very well-managed system.
A prioritization of how their taxes are going to be spent, and that if that falls among the high priorities, then that's where the money is allocated.
But, you know, we're being penny wise and pound foolish here by not figuring out a way, whether it's through, as Gerard suggested, a piece of a broader sales tax, for example. Mass transit helps to drive economic growth.
Sure.
So if we truly want to be able to be a community where we're going to have opportunities for growth, ways for people to get to work, ways for employers to have, for businesses to have people to come buy their goods and services, we have to have a robust mass transit system to be able to do that.
All right, let's spend a few minutes talking about Steve Jobs. His death this week really focused the light on how much his inventions and innovations have changed all of us, have changed society. The Mac, the iPod, iTunes, the iPhone, the iPad, the MacBook, the list goes on and on and on. He changed how the world communicates. He changed entire industries, like the music industry is completely different because of him.
Absolutely. And you know what I really admired about him? He made it cool. You know, technology, you know, Bill Gates, as brilliant as he was, wasn't exactly the definition of cool, but Steve Jobs was. And with all of his products, design and aesthetics was as much a part of it as the high-tech, you know, side of it. And you know, to me, he was this combination of an artist and a hands-on tech guy, and that wasn't the way the tech industry started out. You know, it was entirely nerd bound, and Steve
rightfully so.
Steve Jobs made it cool, and I absolutely agree. It is so much a part of our lives. I mean, I've got a product in my pocket, and I use a Mac at home and wouldn't use anything else. And some of these, when he's come up with them, we said, what in the world would anybody want one of those for? I remember we talked on this show about the iPad. You know, we don't need this. It's like, you know, we got computers, we got phones. Why do we need? Now I want an iPad. Now I really want an iPad.
Is it all positive? Is all the technology that he brought forth positive, or are we creating a generation to a certain degree? If you go out with a teenager, you go out to dinner or something, they sit there, they're texting constantly, they're not paying attention to you.
You can misuse and abuse today's technology, but I think we're far better off because of what he did and everything you mentioned that he invented. I mean, I can't imagine a world today without all of these gadgets and gizmos and what have you. A columnist today said that our era has lost its Thomas Edison, it's Henry Ford, it's Rockefeller, all combined. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. Here was a guy who invented something, and then he not only invented that, but he invented the replacement for that.
Right.
And he rose, he rose up again. And he symbolized our American system, where if you leave these creators, these inventive, innovative people alone, stay out of their way, let them be, let Steve Jobs be Steve Jobs, and they can achieve all this greatness. I think that says a lot for our free enterprise capitalistic system.
One of the problems that you have is that the technology outpaced the society in which created the context that it fell into. So kids having the ability to actually write out a complete sentence when they're texting without using their own little form of shorthand is probably never going to happen. Putting punctuation in where it's appropriate, other than their own little shorthand form of punctuation. We've seen even the language change in the process of how this technology is being employed. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I think time is going to tell, but then there'll be some new form of technology that'll be out there that will probably make this outmoded even. And unfortunately, it won't be Jobs that will have created that technology, but it'll no doubt be someone who's in his shop, was influenced by it. Joel was talking about making it cool. In the 90s, when I was mandated to carry a cell phone around with me, I would inevitably lose it on purpose most times because I didn't like carrying it around. And now I have, an i4, and it looks nice. I mean, it was the nice little glass. It was the shiny glass bit that led me to buy it. And
what's next?
I didn't know how to use it.
You know, I think that's a great question. And I think without Steve Jobs,
we can't possibly
you can't possibly answer that. I mean,
Although he's already created some of the
He
pipeline.
probably has. He probably has. But I mean, the thing that was so amazing about him was he was able to come up with things that nobody could imagine, that you might say, well, what do I need this for? And then you see it, and you see how it works, and you say, I don't know what this is, but I totally know I want it. And it found a place to enhance your life. I mean, our phones now, particularly when you take a look at the iPhones, they're not phones. They're small computers that fit in the palm of your hand. Right. And while it does perhaps have some disadvantages with kids texting and not always, even though you can text on, I guess, any phone, it's much cooler to text on an iPhone. And not using complete sentences or proper punctuation. I remember the first time I sent my son a text in a complete sentence with periods and commas. He said, "What are you doing?" But it opened our imagination to what was possible.
And someone dies of importance and high acclaim, there's usually this honeymoon period where everybody, does what we're doing here tonight. But I think in this case, this global love affair, I think is justified. He deserves it.
Absolutely.
Okay. The iPads and the iPhones may be flying off the shelves, but the rest of the economy is still extremely weak. And for the Republicans, it's not about occupying Wall Street, it's about occupying 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So, is Barack Obama going to be a one-term president? Rick Horowitz looks at some of the latest numbers. Rick.
Republicans are overwhelmingly confident about taking back the White House in 2012. That's from this week's Washington Post ABC News poll. So is this. Democrats are less sure that their guy has another big win in him. Isn't that just like the Democrats? Plagued with self-doubt, while the Republicans are brimming with self-confidence. Fully 83% of Republicans, this is the Post story again, fully 83% say the GOP nominee, whoever he or she may be, is likely to claim the presidency next year. Whoever he or she may be. And for the Democrats, not so much. Only 58% think President Obama will be reelected. And nationally, counting independents as well as Democrats and Republicans, only 37% expect Obama to win, while 55% expect the winner to be the Republican candidate. Now, if they can just figure out how to nominate the Republican candidate, not any particular Republican candidate, you understand, not Mitt Romney or Rick Perry or Herman Cain or Michelle Bachmann, but simply the Republican candidate. See, the Republican candidate is a terrific candidate, right on all the issues, great at debates, wonderful with people, raises tons of money, no flubs on the videotape, no skeletons in the closet, excites the base, and attracts those crucial independents. Anyway, if those are the choices on the ballot, then the GOP is home free. It'll be generic Republican by a landslide. There's only one problem. That's not how it works. They have to run an actual living, breathing human being. And when the mythical generic Republican finally gets an actual name, an actual face, not to mention actual positions and flip-flops and flubs, not to mention actual unreconciled former rivals, not to mention whatever actual baggage might be rolling around out there somewhere, well, that's when it gets interesting. Not that the Republicans might not win anyway. I mean, with the economy where it is and with the mood of the country where it is, it's hardly a perfect time to be an incumbent. It's just that despite all that Republican confidence and Democratic despair, the other guy will also be less than perfect.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.